I lost my husband in a single night. One moment, I was a young wife, dreaming of a simple, happy life. The next, I was left alone, holding two small children in my arms, with no one to turn to. In the 1970s, being a single mother wasn't just hard. It was a scarlet mark, a weight that followed me through every street in our little Midwestern town. And yet, that was only the beginning of the battles I had to face. But before we begin, I have one request for you. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me so much to keep sharing these stories. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I would love to know how far my voice can travel, because I've never been there. The town where I grew up was small, tucked into the flat fields of the Midwest, where corn stretched for miles and the wind carried the smell of earth long after the harvest. Autumn evening painted the horizon in shades of amber and rust, and the nights came early, with a sharp bite in the air that pressed against your skin, no matter how tightly you pulled your coat. Main Street was only a few blocks long, with its row of brick-front stores, a drugstore that had been there since the 40s, and a diner where farmers gathered over black coffee and bacon in the mornings. Life there was predictable, a rhythm set by church bells on Sundays and the school bell on weekdays. In such a place, change did not come quickly, until it landed in my lap all at once, ripping the steady ground out from under my feet. I was only 23 when the unthinkable happened. My husband, John, a man with a warm laugh and shoulders broad enough to carry half the world, never made it through the winter of 1971. He had left that morning whistling, his jacket pulled tight against the chill, promising me he'd be home in time for supper. But the call came in the afternoon. By the time I rushed to the county hospital, its long corridors lined with squeaking linoleum and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the doctors could only shake their heads. A heart condition no one had known about had struck him down in a matter of minutes. Just like that, the man who was my anchor, my partner, the father of my two small children, was gone. I remember standing outside those hospital doors, the November wind slapping against my face, my hair whipping loose from its bun. The world around me seemed to go on cars rolling past, people walking briskly down the sidewalk, while inside me everything had fallen silent. I clutched my coat tighter, the fabric thin against the cold, and stared at my reflection in the glass. A widow stared back, though I could hardly believe it. My brown eyes looked older, weary, the eyes of a woman who had just stepped into a different life, one she had never asked for. When I walked back into our little rented house on the edge of town, it was too quiet. The squeak of the screen door closing behind me sounded like thunder. David, only 5 years old, came running with a toy truck in his hand, his blonde hair mussed from an afternoon nap. He tugged on my skirt and asked, "Where's Daddy?" Anna, just 3, sat cross-legged on the rug, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her wide blue eyes fixed on me, waiting for an answer. I could not find the words. My mouth opened, but nothing came out, only tears that blurred my vision as I sank to my knees and held them both tight. Being a single mother in those days was no badge of courage. It was a mark, a stain, something whispered about in church pews and grocery store aisles. At the market, where I pushed a cart with Anna perched inside and David trailing behind, I could feel eyes on me. Some pitied me, others judged me. I caught words carried on hushed voices. "Poor girl," or "must have done something wrong." At the diner, where once John and I had shared Sunday pie, I sat alone with my children, trying to enjoy a slice of apple pie that tasted more like ashes under the weight of curious stares. Grief was relentless. It came in waves, morning and night, in moments small and large. After the children were tucked into their narrow beds, the house would fall silent. I would sit at the kitchen table, the ticking of the clock echoing in the emptiness, bills spread out before me, numbers I could not stretch far enough. The refrigerator hummed, the radiator clanked, but nothing filled the hollow inside me. Sometimes I pressed my hands flat against the table to stop them from trembling, as if by holding still I could stop the world from spinning out of control. My mother, Helen, long gone by then, had left me with words that came back to me in those dark hours. Every tear you shed waters the seed of your strength. I repeated them under my breath when the night grew too heavy. Still, there were moments when even her wisdom felt far away, when loneliness clawed so fiercely that I thought I might not make it to morning. There was one night I will never forget. Rain lashed against the windows, streaking the glass, and the house groaned in the wind. I stood by the window, arms wrapped around myself, staring at the street lamp outside. Its pale circle of light on the wet pavement looked like a stage where some other life was being acted out, one I could never join again. My breath fogged the glass, and for a fleeting moment I wondered if it would be easier to give up, to stop fighting the current that pulled me under. Then, from down the hall, I heard a sound, soft, small, barely more than a murmur. Anna shifted in her sleep, clutching her rabbit tighter, a whimper slipping past her lips. David's voice followed, a half-formed word, a dream spilling into the air. I tiptoed into their room, the glow from the nightlight casting soft shadows across the walls. Standing there, watching their little chests rise and fall, I felt something stir in me. Their faces, so innocent, so trusting, anchored me to the earth again. It wasn't strength in the grand sense. It wasn't a sudden bolt of courage or some miracle epiphany. It was simply the knowledge that they needed me, that their eyes, when they opened in the morning, would be searching for me, not for a broken woman, but for their mother. And I knew I could not let them down. Still, I won't lie to you. Many nights I believed I could not endure it. Many nights the darkness pressed so close it seemed to swallow me whole. And yet each time, it was the same two pairs of eyes, blue and brown, that pulled me back from the edge. The alarm clock never asked permission. At 6 each morning it clanged with a shrill insistence, dragging me from shallow sleep and into another day. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the floorboards cold under my feet, and listened for a moment to the silence of the house. The children were still asleep, their breaths faint down the hallway, and for those few minutes I let myself breathe too. Then the day began. The kitchen smelled of weak coffee, brewed in a dented percolator that hissed on the stove. The aroma was thin, watery, but it was the ritual that mattered something to hold me steady before the rush. I pulled on a faded cardigan, tied my hair back, and began to move, cracking eggs into a pan, spreading peanut butter across slices of bread, tucking apple wedges into brown paper bags. The counter was cluttered with chipped plates, the walls a pale yellow dulled with age, but I worked quickly, as if each motion was part of a dance I knew by heart. By the time the clock struck 7, David padded into the room, rubbing his eyes, his blonde hair sticking up like wheat in the wind. Anna followed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, still half asleep, her cheeks rosy from the cold that crept through the thin windows. I kissed their foreheads, set plates before them, and coaxed bites past their small mouths while glancing at the time. It was always a race, to feed them, to pack their bags, to bundle them into coats with mittens strung through their sleeves, and to walk them into the biting air of a Midwest winter morning. I left David at the elementary school, its brick walls dark with age, children's voices rising in chaotic chorus across the yard. Anna I carried to the church daycare, where volunteers, grey-haired women in thick sweaters took her tiny hand with practiced patience. I bent to kiss her goodbye, my chest aching as her eyes followed me all the way to the door. Then I turned toward my own work, which was never just one job, but whichever task I could find that week. Some mornings I scrubbed floors at the county office, kneeling until my knees burned on hard linoleum, the smell of bleach filling my nostrils. Other times I sorted clothes in the thrift store's back room, my fingers raw from cold water, my arms heavy from hauling bags donated by those who had much more than I did. On better days, I washed dishes in the diner on Main Street, the clatter of plates ringing in my ears, while the smell of bacon and grease clung to my hair long after I left. Each job paid little $2 an hour here, a few dollars there, but it was enough to keep the lights on and bread in the cupboard. The town noticed. Neighbors always notice. At the laundromat, as I folded worn shirts and patched jeans, I heard the murmurs, "She works too much. Poor kids." At the grocery store, standing in line with a basket of beans, flour, and milk, I felt the eyes of women with neat hair and pressed skirts as I counted coins carefully into the cashier's hand. Sometimes they offered pitying smiles, other times sharp looks that cut deeper than words. They never said it outright, but I could hear it all the same. That a woman raising children alone was not quite respectable, not quite whole. Their whispers followed me home. In the narrow hallway of our rented house, I could still feel their judgment clinging to my skin like the smell of detergent. Yet there was no space to let it sink in. There were clothes to wash, suppers to cook, homework to check. I worked until my hands ached, until my back screamed, until the weight of the day pushed me into the chair at the kitchen table, long after the children had gone to sleep. In those hours, I often thought of my mother, Helen. She had been tall, slender, with silver beginning to streak her hair even when I was still a girl. Her voice was steady, never raised in anger, but carrying the firmness of someone who had lived through droughts, through lean harvests, through the long years of hardship that farm life carved into the body. I saw her in my mind's eye as clearly as if she were still with me, hands rough from labor, eyes calm but fierce, lips curved into a thin smile as she told me again and again, "Every tear you shed waters the seed of your strength." I clung to that sentence as if it were scripture. When exhaustion blurred my vision, when shame burned under the weight of other people's stares, I repeated it to myself. Each tear that fell into the soapy dishwater, each tear that dropped onto the pillow at night, I tried to imagine as nourishment for some hidden root inside me, something that might one day grow tall enough to carry us out of this valley of struggle. Still, there were evenings when the weight felt unbearable. After supper, after stories, after the children's slow drift into sleep, the silence pressed in like a heavy blanket. I would sit at the kitchen table, my elbows on the worn wood, staring at the stack of bills beside the flickering light of a single lamp. The hum of the refrigerator filled the emptiness, a lonely sound. My reflection in the dark window showed a face older than my 20-some years, a face lined by fatigue and shadowed by fear. On some nights, I tried to distract myself with simple tasks. Mending socks, ironing shirts, scrubbing the counter until it shone. But the silence always returned, whispering questions I could not answer. How long could I keep moving at this pace? How long before my body gave way, before my spirit collapsed under the constant weight? One night, the The storm outside was fierce. Rain battered the windows, streaking the glass in jagged lines. The wind moaned through the trees, bending their branches low, rattling the roof with sharp gusts. I stood by the window, the chill seeping through the glass, my breath clouding against the pane. Beyond the street lamp's pale circle of light, the road was empty, slick with rain, stretching away into darkness. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes. My mother's words came back to me once more, but they felt distant, like an echo across a canyon. For the first time, I wondered if she had been wrong, if tears did not plant strength at all, but only watered despair. My hands trembled against the window frame, and my chest tightened with a fear I could not name. And in that moment, as the storm raged outside and silence swallowed the house, I asked myself a question I had never dared to voice aloud. Would I break before the morning came? It was not in grand gestures that I found my footing again, but in the smallest of sounds. The laughter of my children drifting through the thin walls of our little house. Their giggles rose like music, light and unexpected, filling rooms that had been so heavy with grief. Some days it came from David's delight as he raced a toy truck across the worn linoleum. Other days it was Anna, her voice bubbling like a brook as she sang to her stuffed rabbit in a tune only she understood. Those moments reminded me that even in darkness, life could still offer flickers of joy, tender and fragile, yet strong enough to steady my heart. We had very little. The pantry shelves held more air than food, and the refrigerator often hummed over half-empty jars. Still, I made it my mission to turn our suppers into celebrations, no matter how plain the ingredients. A pot of vegetable soup simmered slowly on the stove, filling the house with the earthy scent of carrots and onions. I baked cornbread in a dented pan, its crust golden and crisp, and when I placed it on the table, David and Anna clapped as if I had unveiled a feast. We ate with gratitude, laughter mixing with the steam that rose from our bowls. It wasn't about what we had. It was about what we made of it. I found that even candlelight could transform the mood. On nights when the electricity bill weighed heavy, and I chose to keep the lights dim, I lit a stub of wax in the center of the table. Its warm glow softened the sharp edges of our small kitchen and turned the cracked linoleum into a stage where love and resilience took the lead. The children's faces, bathed in golden light, shone with wonder as if we were at a banquet hall instead of a rented house with peeling paint. Those meals became our refuge. David would tell me about his school day, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to recall spelling words. Anna, her cheeks pink from the cold outside, often interrupted with stories only half real, but full of imagination castles, kittens, and fairy queens who always triumphed. I listened as if every word were scripture, nodding, laughing, encouraging them to share more. For in their voices, I found not only distraction, but also the courage to keep stepping forward. Work remained hard, endless, and low-paying. At the sewing shop, where I often took shifts mending uniforms and hemming skirts, my hands moved automatically, the needle flashing under the harsh fluorescent lights. Around me, the hum of machines and the smell of fabric dust filled the air. My shoulders ached, my fingers pricked raw, yet I pressed on. Most of the women kept their heads down, focusing on the steady rhythm of their tasks. But one afternoon, as I lifted my eyes from the fabric, I caught sight of Clara. Clara was in her late 30s, a sturdy woman with auburn hair always pulled back in a scarf, freckles scattered across her cheeks, and eyes that carried both kindness and weariness. She often wore plaid shirts rolled at the sleeves and jeans faded from use, her posture upright but not rigid, her smile quick but never forced. She looked at me for a long moment, then leaned closer, lowering her voice so it carried only to my ears. "Margaret," she said gently, her eyes holding mine, "your eyes still shine. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." For a moment I didn't know how to respond. I blinked, surprised, my mouth opening but no words forming. Something inside me, something worn thin by exhaustion and grief, stirred at her remark. To think that anyone could see brightness in me when I felt so dim seemed almost impossible. Yet Clara's words lingered long after she turned back to her work. That evening, as I walked home through the chill air, carrying bread and milk in a paper sack, her voice echoed in my head. "Your eyes still shine." I thought of the way David and Anna looked at me across the supper table, their laughter carrying me through each weary night. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps, despite the heaviness I carried, there was still light inside me, light my children needed, light I had no right to extinguish. The days continued much the same, but I noticed small changes within myself. When neighbors whispered at the grocery store, I still felt the sting, but I held my head a little higher. When exhaustion tugged at me during long hours at the sewing shop, I remembered Clara's words and pushed through. And when the children laughed, I let myself laugh with them, not only out of obligation, but out of genuine gratitude. One Saturday evening, after a long week, I placed a simple meal on the table: soup and cornbread, as always. But this time, I added a small jar of strawberry jam I had managed to buy on sale. I spread it across the warm slices, and the children's faces lit up as if I had given them a holiday feast. Their laughter rang out, and I laughed too, the sound spilling into every corner of the room. In that moment, the house no longer felt like a place of scarcity, but a sanctuary, a reminder that love could stretch even the meagerest of resources into something abundant. Yet as the children slept, and I sat once more by the window, the night pressing close, I could not escape a deeper truth. Joy was real, and strength could be drawn from the smallest of things. Still, I had no map out of the cycle that bound me, work that barely paid, bills that never ended, judgment that hovered like a shadow. I wanted to believe that every trial was a step upward, that each hardship could be a rung in a ladder leading somewhere higher. But where? How? The questions lingered as the rain tapped steadily against the glass, my reflection staring back at me with eyes that carried both light and uncertainty. The flyer was tacked to the bulletin board in the library, its corners curled, its ink slightly faded. Community skills. Training free enrollment. I stood before it, my grocery bag heavy in one arm, my heart heavier still, and read the words twice as if they might change on the second glance. The program promised new opportunities: secretarial training, bookkeeping, and typing courses designed for women trying to re-enter the workforce. My hands trembled as I reached out to steady the paper against the corkboard. Something inside me whispered that this might be the chance I had been waiting for, though fear quickly followed. Fear of failure, fear of being too late, fear of not belonging in a classroom again. That night, after supper, after the dishes had been scrubbed and the children tucked in, I sat at the kitchen table with the flyer spread before me. The lamplight cast a pool of gold across its wrinkled surface, and I traced the printed words with my finger. David wandered into the room, rubbing his eyes. "Mama, what's that?" he asked, his voice small. I looked at him and said softly, "Maybe it's our next step." Within a week, I had signed my name. The classes were held in the basement of the county community centre, its cement floors echoing with footsteps, its folding chairs lined in rows beneath fluorescent lights. Women of every age filled the seats, some widows, some divorced, some simply trying to build a better life. The instructor, Mrs. Carter, was in her early 50s, with sharp glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, silver hair coiled neatly at the back of her head, and a brisk, no-nonsense manner that disguised a kind heart. She handed out thick workbooks, the smell of fresh paper and ink filling the air, and told us we would all learn to master the typewriter, to manage ledgers, to answer phones with confidence. I worked nights to afford the days. After finishing a late shift at the diner, where grease and steam clung to my hair and clothes, I walked home under the pale streetlights, my bones aching from exhaustion. Yet at dawn, while the town still slept, I gathered my notebooks, packed lunches for David and Anna, and hurried to the community centre. The hours stacked on top of one another like bricks in a wall, pressing hard against my body, but I refused to let them crush me. There were moments when I thought I would collapse. I would sit in class, the keys of the typewriter clacking around me, and feel my eyelids droop. My back ached from the double shifts, and my hands cramped as I struggled to keep pace with the assignments. Yet each time despair pressed close, I thought of my children. Their faces, lit by candlelight at our supper table, their laughter ringing like bells in the narrow house weaving. Those memories into the fabric of my days gave me the will to continue. At home, our evenings transformed. David sat at the table with his spelling lists, Anna with her crayons, while I practiced drills from my workbook. The kitchen, once a place of meals and chores alone, became our classroom. I read instructions aloud while the children recited their lessons beside me, our voices mingling in a chorus of determination. Sometimes I stumbled, hitting the wrong key or smudging a column of figures, and David would laugh, his eyes bright with mischief. "Mama, you need practice," he'd say, and I would laugh too, because he was right. Anna often coloured pictures of houses with wide porches and gardens blooming in the front, handing them to me as if to say, "Here, Mama, this is what we are working for." I taped her drawings to the refrigerator door, letting them remind me that every tired night, every aching morning was for more than survival. It was for a dream of something brighter, steadier, safer. The support of others carried me as well. At the sewing shop, where I still worked part-time, Clara noticed the notebooks peeking out of my bag. She asked about them, her freckled face breaking into a smile when I told her. "Good for you, Margaret," she said, her voice warm. "That's the kind of fire people can't put out." Her words gave me courage when the hours felt endless, when my body wanted only to sleep. Weeks slipped into months, the winter frost giving way to spring. My fingers grew surer on the typewriter keys, my mind quicker with figures and schedules. I discovered a part of myself I had nearly forgotten. The student, the learner, the woman capable of building new skills, even in the middle of hardship. For the first time in years, I began to imagine a door opening, not just closing. Still, the climb was steep. I often came home so tired I barely managed to heat soup for supper, so weary that my body shook as I read bedtime stories aloud. Yet even then, when the children kissed me goodnight, I felt a strange peace. Sacrifice was no longer empty. It had become an investment in tomorrow. And then came the letter. It arrived one bright morning, slipped beneath our front door in a plain envelope, the community centre's seal stamped in blue on the corner. My heart pounded as I tore it open, scanning the words until my breath caught. A local company was seeking clerical workers, and Mrs. Carter had recommended me for an interview. I held the paper in trembling hands, reading it again and again. Hope swelled inside me, fierce and terrifying all at once. I thought of David and Anna, of Clara's encouragement, of my mother's words echoing through the years. My chest ached with the weight of it, a possibility, fragile as glass, yet gleaming in the morning light. The interview was set for Friday. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it flat, and placed it inside the drawer by my bed. That night, as the children slept and the house grew still, I sat by the window with the paper resting against my chest. My pulse quickened, my hands damp with nervous sweat. For the first time in so long, the horizon did not look like a wall, but like a gate that might open. Yet my heart whispered both hope and fear. What if I wasn't ready? What if the chance slipped through my fingers? The call came on a Tuesday morning, crisp and clear through the static of our old rotary phone. A woman's voice, steady and professional, told me that the local insurance company had reviewed my interview and decided to offer me a position as a clerical assistant. For a moment, I simply sat there in silence, the receiver pressed against my ear, as if the words might vanish if I moved too quickly. Then my knees went weak, and I sank into the nearest chair, my hand trembling against the table. A job steady, respectable, with a paycheck that could finally stretch beyond survival. The office stood on Main Street, in a brick building with wide windows that gleamed in the morning sun. On my first day, I wore the best dress I owned, a navy skirt and a cream blouse, pressed carefully the night before. My shoes were scuffed at the toes, but they were polished as bright as I could make them. I walked through the glass doors with my heart pounding, each step a mixture of pride and fear. Inside, the smell of fresh paper and ink greeted me, along with the rhythmic click of typewriters and the low hum of conversation. My supervisor, Mr. Bennett, was a man in his early 50s, tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and a voice that carried both authority and kindness. He shook my hand firmly and introduced me to the team, clerks and assistants seated at desks, neatly arranged in rows, their faces curious but not unkind. They showed me my stationer desk by the window, a typewriter that gleamed with promise, a stack of folders waiting to be organized. I traced my fingers across the keys, the metal cool beneath my touch, and felt as though I had crossed into another world. The days settled into rhythm. I typed letters, filed reports, answered phones with a steady voice. The work was not glamorous, but it was mine, and it came with a paycheck that held weight in my hands. For the first time, I could pay the bills on time, buy groceries without counting every coin, even tuck a few dollars away at the back of the drawer. It felt like breathing after years underwater. Colleagues began to learn pieces of my story. At first, they only saw the woman at the desk, quiet but diligent, her eyes focused on the keys. But one afternoon in the break room, over coffee poured from a communal pot, someone asked about my children. I answered simply, and soon the truth unfolded, that I was raising them alone, that I had fought my way through nights of grief and days of labor, that this job was more than work. It was a lifeline. Silence followed, then nods, then something in their expressions softened. From that day forward, I noticed the difference. The glances were no longer curious, but respectful. The greetings warmer, the offers of help genuine. Respect did not end at the office doors. Words seemed to ripple through the town, carried by neighbors who once whispered with disapproval. At the grocery store, Mrs. Hayes, who had so often looked past me, paused at the aisle to say, "Margaret, I hear you're working at the insurance office. Good for you." Her voice carried admiration where once there had been pity. The shift was subtle yet powerful, like the first green shoots pushing through frozen soil. At home, the change was even more profound. David walked taller, his shoulders squared as he told his teacher that his mama worked downtown. Anna's laughter filled the house with new confidence, her drawings more vivid, her stories brighter. When I came home in the evening, weary but proud, they met me at the door with arms open wide, their voices bubbling over with tales of school and playground triumphs. Our little home, once shadowed by fear, now pulsed with energy and hope. Even the neighbors noticed. The same people who once lowered their eyes when I passed now waved from their porches. Mr. Turner, who lived across the street, offered to fix the loose hinge on our gate without being asked. Mrs. Whitaker, who had rarely spoken beyond polite nods, sent over a plate of cookies one Sunday afternoon. Respect had replaced judgment, and admiration had softened the hard edges of gossip. In the evenings, I still cooked simple meals. Soup, cornbread, sometimes roast chicken when the budget allowed. But now the table felt different. We ate not just to fill our bellies, but to celebrate small victories, to savor the taste of progress. David helped set the plates. Anna placed folded napkins with pride, and I lit a candle at the center of the table, its flame dancing like a silent witness to our journey. There were moments when I caught my reflection in the window and hardly recognized myself. My face still bore the lines of hardship, but my eyes carried something new, an assurance, a light that no longer flickered with uncertainty, but burned with quiet strength. I thought often of my mother's words. Every tear waters the seed of strength. At last, I began to see the truth in them. And yet, even in the midst of this newfound stability, I knew the road was not over. Life had taught me too well that victories could be fragile, that the world could shift beneath your feet when you least expected it. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, I stood by the window with the paycheck still folded in my hand. The night outside was calm, the street lamp glowing softly over empty sidewalks. I whispered to myself, almost in prayer, "This is not the final victory. There is still a long way to go." The porch creaked gently under my rocking chair, its wood polished smooth by years of summers and winters, of laughter and tears. I sat there at 72, a shawl draped across my shoulders, watching the evening sun sink low over the quiet streets of our Midwestern town. The air smelled of cut grass and faint lilacs drifting from a neighbor's yard, and the voices of my grandchildren rose in a sweet, chaotic chorus from the yard. Their feet pounded across the lawn, their laughter spilling into the twilight like bells rung in celebration. David now had children of his own, tall boys with sandy hair who chased each other with sticks held like swords. Anna's little girls, ribbons tied in their braids, twirled across the grass as if the world itself was a stage for their joy. I watched them with a smile that reached deep into my bones, a smile lined with decades of struggle and survival. To see them run so freely, so unburdened, was to witness the very dream I had once held in trembling hands, on nights when despair pressed close. The house behind me hummed with voices, too. My children, now grown, talking easily over the clatter of dishes and the smell of dinner baking. The kitchen that had once been our makeshift classroom, our battlefield and sanctuary, now rang with warmth, filled by voices that carried no fear. My heart swelled with pride, because every sacrifice, every sleepless night, Every tear shed in silence had led to this: a family not broken, but flourishing. I thought often about the scars I carried, not the kind you see on skin, but the kind that live quietly inside. Scars from loss, from loneliness, from the long years of being judged and dismissed. And yet I no longer saw them as marks of shame. They had become my medals of honor, proof of the strength a mother can summon when the world leaves her no choice but to fight. Each scar was a story, each wrinkle a testimony, each grey strand of hair a reminder that survival itself can be a triumph. Sometimes the children asked about the past. "Grandma," they would say, their eyes wide with curiosity, "was it hard when you were young?" And I would pause, my voice soft, careful to balance truth with hope. I told them that life was not easy, that the world could be cruel, but that love had a way of turning pain into something greater. I wanted them to understand that what they saw, the yard, the house, the laughter, was built not from wealth, but from courage and faith. I could still hear my mother's voice, though she had been gone for decades. Every tear you shed waters the seed of your strength. At last, I knew she had been right all along. Her words had carried me through years of exhaustion, and now they echoed as a legacy, passed not just to me, but to the children and grandchildren gathered in my yard. For I had lived long enough to see that pain, when met with persistence and love, does not destroy it, transforms. As twilight deepened, I leaned forward on the chair, listening to the cicadas sing their endless song. My heart was full, yet not naive. I knew that victories never lasted forever, that each generation would face storms of its own. But I also knew this: love is the anchor, and resilience is the sail. With those, even the fiercest winds cannot carry you away. I looked at the faces of my grandchildren, flushed with joy, their eyes bright with dreams they had not yet named. I wanted them to know that they were heirs not only to my love, but also to my courage, that they carried within them the proof that one woman's fight could ripple outward, shaping lives beyond her own. So tonight, as the last light faded and the first stars blinked awake, I offered my heart to those listening beyond my porch, to the ones who might be sitting alone, feeling the weight of despair. My voice may be older now, softer with age, but it carries the same truth that sustained me through the hardest nights. Dawn always comes after darkness. However long the night, however heavy the storm, the sun will rise again, bringing warmth and possibility. And so I say to you, whoever you are, wherever you are listening, do not surrender. Hold on through the hours when your strength seems spent, through the whispers that tell you you cannot endure. Because one day, you too will sit in the golden light of evening, with laughter surrounding you, and you will know that every tear, every sacrifice was worth it. As the story comes to a close, I invite you to pause for just a moment. Life has a way of carrying us through storms we never asked for, yet somehow, within each of us, there is a quiet strength that rises when we need it most. The journey may be heavy, the nights long, but even the smallest flicker of hope can light an entire path forward. We are reminded that dignity does not come from wealth or titles, but from the way we keep showing up, day after day, with love in our hearts. Sometimes it is enough simply to endure, and in that endurance, to plant seeds of courage that others may one day harvest. So if you are listening tonight and carrying your own burdens, know this: you are not alone. There is beauty still waiting ahead, in laughter, in kindness, in the bonds that hold us together. Thank you for spending this time with me. May peace and warmth find their way into your home this evening. And if this story touched you, I would be grateful if you would subscribe and share your thoughts. Your presence here truly matters.